Hello, my name is Natalia Vostokova. I'm Chief Operating Officer of IPHARMA, and we welcome you on the webinar that will describe some specifics of clinical trials and market access in Russia. Welcome those who are interested in drug development, and welcome those who want to know something new about this geography. Russia is developing very fast, so we'll be happy to share with you the latest news. But first of all, in the morning when I was preparing the slides, Google reminded me of an anniversary that we celebrate today, anniversary of a Russian scientist who, during the World War II, developed and actually she invented Russian penicillin. She was a microbiologist, and she was head of the microbial biochemistry department of the Academy of Science in the Soviet Union, and so she was the first person who isolated the penicillin stain and independently synthesized penicillin in the Soviet Union. And basically, and actually, she was the first patient because she performed the experiment in herself. She infected herself with cholera, can you imagine? And then she took the drug that she invented, and it helped her to recover from the disease. So basically, this was the very important drug development event in the history of the Russian and Soviet pharmaceutical industry during the 20th century, because with the penicillin, this was a huge step that helped to prevent and to treat infections during the Second World War and then later during the civil time. So this was just a very brief story from the history, but it reminds us of how important it is to develop the science, to develop the medical and pharmaceutical industry, and we even now cannot imagine how fast we right now running with the drug development. So can you imagine the antibiotics they just developed like 50, 60 years ago? They just were introduced into the pharmaceutical and medicine. And right now we're talking about cell products, we're talking about gene therapies, we're talking about artificial intelligence and all the new technologies that we can get from the current science development. So let's go back to Russia, and I want to give you a glimpse, country profile relevant to clinical trials. Of course, you know that Russia is the largest country in the world by territory, and we are located in the European and Asian part, so we can divide Russia by two. And the population of Russia is about 147,000 million people, which is huge, I understand. And it's also important to know that the majority of the Russian population is Caucasian. Of course, we have some part of Asian population, which is about, I would say, maybe 5 to 7%, and a very small number of other ethnicities. So basically, Russia is also known for large cities. The majority of the population that lives in large cities such as Moscow, that inhabits like 12.5 million people, and St. Petersburg 5.4 million people, and there are like dozens of cities of over 1 million people. So when we're talking about clinical trials, we of course think about these large cities and large clinics that can provide many patients. Russia has been in clinical research for more than 20 years already. I remember it started in the late 90s when the first pharmaceutical companies, of course those were big pharma companies, came to Russia to involve Russian sites, to enroll Russian patients into the international multi-center clinical trials. Later on, in 2005, Russia harmonized its national clinical trial standards with ICH-GCP. So basically, from the very beginning, we we try to follow all the international approaches and international standards relevant to the clinical research. Since 2015, Russia is also part of Eurasian Economic Union, which is a new entity, and it is very important that within this Eurasian Union we have new guidelines for almost everything in clinical research, and those guidelines are mainly harmonized with ICH and European guidelines. So Russia is catching up with the rest of the world, with the US and European and Japanese approaches already established in drug development, and we do hope that within the next couple of years Russian standards will be acknowledged and accepted worldwide. It is also important to say that Russia can provide a lot of patients on clinical trials. We have 1,400 accredited clinical sites all over Russia, and you can imagine the majority of them are located in those large cities already mentioned. In Russia, we have a list of more than 3,800 qualified investigators. Those are physicians with experience in clinical research, and so they can be approached and recruited to participate in clinical trials. And one important note that every year Russia provides about 50 to 70,000 patients in clinical trials. So this is also a huge number, and I'm sure that this impact that Russia has on clinical research worldwide, as well as new drugs and new medicines that can be provided to Russian patients within these clinical trials, it is a huge step and very important development of the Russian pharmaceutical market that helps all the parties. It helps pharmaceutical companies, it helps doctors, it helps patients, and everybody is quite interested in this area. Here I'd like to show you some records, clinical trial records in Russia, and you can see that during the last 5 years the number of clinical trials is more or less steady. We have on average about 750 studies every year. The majority of them, about 500 studies annually, those are phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 studies. But we also have a large part, like 250 studies every year for bioequivalence. And when we look into the structure of clinical trials, we can see that still the majority of clinical trials that they come from from foreign pharmaceutical companies. About 36% of clinical trials are international, so Russia is included in international multi-center clinical trials as one of the countries, and this is a very wise step, I should say, because this allows Russia to get the drug faster, because the sponsor, the drug developer, can apply for registration in Russia in parallel with other countries and doesn't have to do any local trials if he has any data from Russian clinical sites and international multi-center trials. However, there is also a significant amount of local trials, such as local phase 1 to 3 trials from foreign pharma, as well as about 14% of bioequivalence trials. I should say that this is very important as well, and mainly due to the requirements for market application in Russia. So if you as a pharmaceutical company want to put a drug on the Russian market, you do need to provide some clinical data from Russian patients. So if you didn't consider Russia during your large phase 3 programs, you will still have to consider it later when you want to get to the Russian market and do some local, not that large, but still some, phase 3 studies to show efficacy and safety in Russian population. As for generics, the same situation. Every generic, even if it's already somewhere in Europe or wherever in the world, to get it on the Russian market, you need to do a local bioequivalence study. But I'm very proud to say that, as you can see on the picture, it's more than 40% of clinical trials in Russia currently run and initiated by local pharmaceutical companies. The Russian pharmaceutical industry is recovering after the change from, Soviet times. There was some period of time when the pharmaceutical industry was not that good, and it took a lot of investment to develop Russian companies, Russian manufacturers, Russian market, and right now we can see that it's more or less on the same level with the big pharma. So this is very important as well, and you can see that generics and original drugs are like 50-50 in this pie. Of course, I want to share with you that all this information is public. It comes from the registry of the Ministry of Health. All the approved clinical trials are published there, so we can make this analytics and share with you and follow some changes in the country. I also want to share some other important things in the Russian arena. I'm sure some of you follow this information, but some of you might be very new to it. But during the last several years, Russia has been changing a lot, and the environment has been changing, the industry has been changing, the technology, and Russia is, I would say, it's quite advanced in terms of some technology changes, and hopefully it's on the same level as the Western countries. And of course we know that China is very fast, and Korea is very fast. So we are trying to be in top leaders of this changing environment in IT. So what was new on the Russian arena during the last several years? First of all, the huge step was taken in 2013 when a Russian government initiated this national program, IPHARMA 2020. It was basically the first national initiative to support development of Russian pharmaceutical industry. Support with money, of course. So the government invested more than 50 billion Russian rubles, which was approximately $1 billion in development of Russian generics and Russian original products. It really helped a lot. We could see the boost of clinical trials and preclinical trials from Russian developers. New startups were starting developing their drugs in Russia, and that was really impressive because it took just several years to change the whole environment in Russia. Right now, I should say this program helped to almost like replace, I would say, the vast majority of the generic products with the Russian equivalents, and of course with the originals it's not that fast, but still Russia is trying to join this international movement for developing new high-tech products. One more important change, it happened in 2014 with the new GMP rules. And actually right now, GMP, as stated by the Russian law, it is inspected by the Russian Ministry of Trade, and those GMP inspections of local and foreign pharmaceutical manufacturers are right now mandatory. So if you are a pharmaceutical company and you want to put a drug on the Russian market, you need to think of a GMP inspection from a Russian authority in advance. So you need to apply for this inspection and make sure that by the time you apply, you're at least in the short list for the inspections. Another important change, it happened in 2015. I already mentioned Eurasian Economic Union, which united Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and other countries of the region. With the main idea, of course, is the common markets, common approaches in many areas, and of course in pharmaceuticals as well. During the last several years, the Eurasian Commission, they developed guidelines for all the aspects of drug development in this territory, in the Eurasian Union. So right now we have GMPs, GLP, GCP, GVA, all the general and more specific, like bivalence, for example, or fixed dose combination. So very specific guidelines that really support us and help us to conduct clinical trials and develop drugs in Russia. It is important also to say that almost all of those guidelines are harmonized with ICH and European guidelines. Basically, they are translations with some local specifics added, but Russia understands, and all the other countries of the area understand that we don't want to invent a bicycle. We want to follow the generally acknowledged and approved approaches. So we are trying to be on the same page with US and Europe and of course ICH. Right now Russia is still not part of ICH, but we follow ICH, so we are in the list of the countries that follow ICH guidelines. I also want to mention that during the last several years, there have been new initiatives and startups and companies developing these new technologies like big data analysis and artificial intelligence, and everything. Like it's really changing. For example, artificial intelligence is already used for analysis of images, which of course supports diagnostics of oncology and CNS diseases. So there are initiatives that collect those data from healthcare organizations. They collect like CT scans, MRI scans, ECG, electro, wherever, all the scans, all the images that are possible. They collect other data. They collect pharmacogenomic data, and based on this information, huge big data, they develop new approaches to diagnostics of severe important diseases, which in the nearest future we really hope it will of course help the doctors and improve the situation with diagnostics in general. One more important thing I want to share with you, that being part of Skolkovo, we of course we closely follow what's going on in Skolkovo. You might know that this is a Russian innovative center. In 2017, Skolkovo opened the largest technopark in Europe. It really houses more than 250 residents, many companies, servicing companies, helping those residents to develop their technologies, including biotech. And this year, on the territory of Skolkovo, also the first clinic of Moscow International Medical Cluster was opened, and there is a plan to open many more clinics within this cluster. This is kind of an independent medical area in Russia, which is again something new and exciting for us, because it will allow countries like Israel or Korea and others to come and work with Russian physicians and share the technologies and do something unusual, something new, not routine, that is not something that we can get in regular hospitals, for example. Of course, the regulatory procedures is also they are also changing, and of course, with all this IT Last year, for example, we had a new law for telemedicine, which is interesting, and we still do not know what to expect. But yes, there are special rules how to treat patients, like via computer, without direct access, without hospital visits and so on. So this is something new that our physicians need to learn. Last year and this year also the legislation for biomedical cell products is being developed and introduced. So we do hope that this will make it more clear and provide more infrastructure for developing biomedical cell products in Russia. I know that there are some companies who really want to come to Russia to develop their cell products, and right now the legislation allows doing that, so we are welcome. And one more initiative from the government, which is of course also very exciting, because there is a plan to introduce electronic health records in all the healthcare institutions in Russia by 2020. And right now, for example, in Moscow, the majority of the city clinics, they have this electronic health records, and some other large institutions. So the plan is to have this one system, one archive, one data storage for all electronic health data in the country, which of course will give some new opportunities to drug developers as well. I mean, for medicine and for us, for those who conduct clinical trials and develop drugs. And the last but not the least, this is the initiative from our company that we introduced this year. We started the first Russian clinical trial platform. It is called CleanLine. It is a website, and it actually contains all information about clinical trials conducted in Russia. So there is a very easy browser you can use to search for clinical trials, specific doctors, physicians who conduct those trials, or clinics. And the idea is to facilitate communication between patients and investigators mainly. So patients could go to this website and find the study they might be interested in, and then find the investigator who's running the trial, and then contact this investigator in the system. And the same on the other side, the investigator who's running a study, who needs patients with a specific disease, might browse the register of patients on the website, identify those who might be suitable, contact them directly at the website, and then invite them to participate in a clinical trial. So we do hope that it will really help all the parties of clinical research, and we will be developing this platform during the next months and years. And I hope to share with you some news about that as well. So some quick words about our company, because of course it's important to say that when you want to go to Russia, if you want to have a trial here, you really need a local partner, and a bit later I will tell you why. So about IPHARMA. IPHARMA is quite a young company. We're Russian CRO, established like 6 years ago. We are located in Skolkovo, and we're actually partners of Skolkovo Innovation Center. Skolkovo is Moscow. We're about 60 employees right now. The majority of them are MDs, PharmDs, and PhDs. We are part of a group of companies, ChemDiff, which is a large Russian R&D. So basically, with ChemRAR, we can do all the steps of drug development, from chemistry, from first molecular screening, from in vivo, in vitro, preclinical work to clinical. I mean, this is what IPHARMA does, and registration and pharmacovigilance and drug, all the steps, to the market and further. And based on the results from the last year, we became #1 Russian CRO, which we're very proud of by the number of studies that we've been running. I also would like to share with you some information of just some quick facts. What we do, we provide full circle of clinical development. So in our company, we have all the internal expertise and employees who are responsible for, first of all, study design and medical writing, for all the regulatory approvals, for project management and site management and monitoring, of course. We also provide medical monitoring during the studies with our medical advisors and pharmacovigilance support later once the drug is on the market. We provide audits and quality assurance. And of course, central laboratory that is important in clinical research, PK, so we have bioanalytical laboratory, local logistics, depot is also very important. Data management we can do locally in our company. We have a DM department and biostats. And finally, of course, if you want to put your drug on the Russian market, we can help you with the marketing authorization application. So we basically do everything, and we have a lot of experience in all phases, starting from first in man. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and 4. We also do bioequivalence and non-interventional studies, helping with drug registration and local PV. We don't have any specific therapeutic area that we are, focused on. We do work in many. I would say that the majority of the trials that we do, they are currently in infections, HIV, hepatitis C, and so on. Of course, a lot of studies are in oncology, in CNS, so neurology and psychiatry, in diabetes, and, well, basically all the areas, cardiology, pulmonology, obstetrics and gynecology, and so on. So we do internal expertise, including medical expertise, and do have experience on clinical sites, working in many therapeutic areas. So within this 6 years, you can see what we have achieved. We have more than 75 drugs in our pipeline, and within this timeline, we have prepared more than 90 clinical trial protocols, as well as IBs and informed consent forms, all the documents that are required for clinical studies. We have received more than 60 clinical trial approvals from the ministry, and we have initiated more than 270 clinical sites. Wow. As for patients and volunteers, right now we are close to 1,000 healthy volunteers enrolled in our trials, mainly phase 1 and bioequivalence, and we have more than 3,000 patients enrolled in our trials. And we're very proud that several drugs have been already put on the Russian market. Some of them are Russian original drugs, some of them are drugs from our foreign partners who come to the Russian market to apply for registration. So we do help with the full cycle for all the steps that are needed to put the drug on the Russian market. Here I would like to introduce the team. I know that it's important to see the faces and to see the people and to talk to them, and unfortunately I cannot show you the whole team. I already mentioned we're like 60 people, but here you can see main figures, those who are responsible, those who are managing the teams of different professionals. So I already introduced myself, so I'm Chief Operating Officer, and I'm PharmD and PhD by my background. I had my PhD actually last year in clinical pharmacology with the clinical study designs. And in clinical research, I've been working for 14 years already with the European and US and Russian and many pharmaceutical sponsors and companies, had FDA inspections and so on. Dr. Julia Trachtenberg, she leads our medical group, our medical department. She's a medical doctor and PhD, and she also has a lot of experience in clinical research as well as in practice. So she's actually a doctor and she's an endocrinologist, and she's a great support to our medical team of medical advisors who are responsible for their therapeutic areas and do medical writing, medical monitoring, and pharmacovigilance. Oksana Kravaeva, she's the head of clinical operations at IPHARMA, and she's also MD by her education, and she's been in clinical research for 17 years already. Worked with many companies, also many sponsors, and all the phases. Actually, she's an excellent expert in all the, everything that you need to organize a trial in Russia, starting from site selection to logistics to, all the specifics you need to know. You can ask Oksana. Pavel Kolkin, he's our director of data management. He's a programmer. This area is quite new for us, so we're developing this data management sector, which is also something that we can be proud of. We can do and provide local studies with the electronic CRFs. We can do biostats for the studies, and basically this is something that is very important because when you use a local provider of data management, of course it makes the budgets more compelling, and it makes things faster, of course, in terms of all the timelines and so on. Diana Sapozhnikova, she's a head of our regulatory. She's from D and PhD, also a clinical pharmacologist. And she's been, for 15 years, she's been doing a lot of drug registration. She has more than 300 drugs applied for registration in Russia. So she's the expert, and she's responsible for all the marketing applications, and supports not only new drug applications, but also devices. So we're happy to have Diana in our team, and she's a really great asset and support to everybody. And of course, quality assurance. So Konstantin Semyonov is our director of quality assurance. He's also MD, and also very, very experienced. He started auditing not only in Russia but also in UK, and he has more than 10 years of auditing clinical trials. So he's responsible for quality management system, for SOPs, for auditing and vendor selection, and of course for site audits and receiving external audits from our clients and from inspections. So with this team, you really can be sure that you have a professional support at each step of a clinical trial and marketing application in Russia. And I'm very happy to be part of this team. A couple of words of the timelines that you might expect from Russia. You might think that Russia is not very easy with proving the studies and so on, but right now it's really very straightforward, and with the changed regulations and with the MOH trying to be as fast as possible, you can get the clinical trial approval within 2 to 3 months maximum. Of course, the clinical trial application starts with preparation of the dossier for a clinical trial. And here we can help with the translations of the study documents if you have one. If you don't have, we can develop the documents. And of course, it's a different story. It's medical writing and all the support that you can get from us in this area as well. We will need the list of investigators and sites who will participate. We will need a power of attorney from the sponsor and some documents for the study drug. So we will need the certificate of analysis and GMP certificate. And then once we have this full package, we apply. And I already mentioned it's about, right now it's really the last approval that we got, it was 57 working days from application, so it was really fast. Usually by the time we wait for clinical trial approval, we do all the site qualifications, we prepare the study database, we do all the logistics preparations, and it is sufficient time to start immediately once we have the clinical trial approval. Of course, if you're a foreign manufacturer, you need to ship us the drug. And the specifics of Russia is that you better use, and basically this is the only option, you need to use a local depot for storage and distribution of the drug. So usually it's 1 or 2 shipments, like bulk shipments of study drug to the country. And we help with all the licenses, with the customs clearance and so on. And once the drug is at the depot, then we can start shipments to the sites from the depot and resupply during the study, and all the logistics in Russia is covered by professional depots that are also very, very good in doing their job. For lab samples experts, if you use a central laboratory somewhere in Europe or in wherever in US, we will help you to get the lab samples expert license and also to organize all the paperwork with the customs to ship the samples either every day during the study, one during the visits, or we can collect the samples if they can be stored somewhere -70 or minus whatever 20, and then ship them immediately once the study is over. So it really depends. We can discuss all the specifics based on the study requirements. But I also want to tell you that we do have quite experienced safety clinical laboratories in Russia that we're using as central laboratories for many trials. So if your study is not very large, if it's not like a worldwide international clinical trial, if you're doing a local trial, of course you don't have to ship any samples outside of Russia. We can provide these services as well within the country. Same for PK laboratory. I already mentioned that we can do all the PKs in-house. If necessary, of course, we can ship them to your lab. It's not a problem at all. It's all this, it's very routine right now. It's very straightforward, and you really need to have a local expert who knows how to get all your paperwork done and how to get all the approvals within the timeline, which is very predictable. As for marketing authorization application in Russia, it is also the process. It's quite straightforward, and this is what we can help you with. So usually we can help you with preparing the CTD, so the dossier for submission. We do all the translations, so we prepare some normative documentation, which could be country specific, and it really needs to be prepared locally and checked by the local experts. We prepare everything that is necessary within the dossier, but there are some things that you need to remember. First of all, if you want to apply for drug registration in Russia, don't forget that you need data from Russian patients within your dossier. It doesn't matter, you could have one site, like 5 patients, that could be enough. There is no limit. You could have like all of them from Russia, but you need to have at least some. So don't forget about Russia when you consider countries for international multi-center clinical trials. Russia will give you a lot of patients. It's a high recruiting country, and it will also facilitate registration of your drug later on. But if you don't have this data, if you didn't involve Russia in international multi-center trials, then that's not a problem. A local BE or for generic, a local small, like I would say small, but yes, it is. It's really, we don't need to repeat the full phase 3 trial, but we do need to have a local piece of, phase 3 to prove the experts from the ministry that the drug is it works in the Russian population. So we can help you with the local trial to be more efficient, as efficient and as cost saving as possible, because we understand that this is something that you must do, but well, of course you don't want to spend much time and money on that. There is one more thing that could be an issue. So before you apply for registration, you need to someone from the Russian experts to review your preclinical profile, because sometimes there are some additional requirements from the Russian regulations, and sometimes it's not all the time. I mean, it's more exceptional, but still there are cases when the Russian MOH says that you need more preclinical data, and they ask you to do something else. And in Russia, we can help you with doing those trials. We have preclinical facilities that can work very quickly, and they know the Russian requirements for all the steps of drug registration, so that's not a problem at all. But the last but not the least, and it's right now one of the major issues sometimes you need to remember about drug registration is Russian GMP certificate. I already mentioned that these GMP inspections from the Russian Ministry of Trade, they became obligatory for all the manufacturers who want to put their drugs on the Russian market. So you need to think in advance. You need to at least apply for the registration, get a confirmation that you've been put on the list, and only then you can apply for marketing authorization. During the time when you see it's like 8 to 12 months when your dossier is considered and reviewed and the expertise is performed and all the steps of drug registration. During this time you need to have to host this GMP inspection, and by the time the MOH is ready to give you the registration certificate, you need to also be ready to present them with the GMP certificate from the Russian Ministry of Trade. So this is something important to remember. Well, the rest is more or less, like predictable. During the expertise, of course, they check not only CTD, not only the data from preclinical and clinical, but they also want to see the samples and they want to see the quality of the drug. So once the quality expertise has started, they stop clock for samples import. So we will help you to ship the samples of your drug in the country, and this special pharmaceutical expertise will be done within this application process. And once everything, all the efficacy, safety, quality expertises, once they are completed, the Ministry of Health makes a decision. There are some specifics for some special products, and sometimes this timeline could be faster. For example, or sometimes there could be some, waivers for some requirements, but for the majority of drugs, you can rely on this schedule and just be ready to answer the questions from the MOH, to provide some additional information, to whatever, be here and work with the local, your local vendor, your local partner for registration. So overall, I would like to just sum up something important about Russia. What you consider when you think about a clinical trial in Russia. First of all, of course, Russia gives a lot of advantages. So, first of all, experienced investigators. The PIs, I already mentioned, we have a very long list of PIs and sub-investigators. And in our requirements, and this is something that you can be sure of, all PIs have at least 3 to 5 years of experience in clinical trials. But they also motivated, which is also very important. They motivated because clinical trials give them their scientific, like they participate in conferences, they share like all this, they do really feel and they like being part of this scientific and research industry. But also, of course, they have their working and financial interest just being part of a clinical trial and getting their grants. So you'll have a lot of motivated investigators in Russia. But also we have highly motivated patients. It's just important to understand that sometimes high quality medical care or some new treatments they are not, or they're just limited, they're not available for everybody. So you will easily find some patients in Russia who will be happy to participate in a clinical trial because they get access to this very qualified doctor, because they get access to this regular site visits, to this medical care, to all the labs and everything. So you'll have compliant and motivated patients in your trial. One more important thing, that for many trials of new products, it is important to have drug-naive patients, those who haven't tried those products before or similar class products or so on. So in Russia, you will find those patients, a lot of them. We're still a bit late with diagnostics in some areas, and of course, we do not have as full access to new drugs as somewhere in Europe, for example. So the new drugs, they come to the Russian market a bit later. So we will find a lot of drug-naive patients for studies if you need them. Overall, you can expect high recruiting sites. You can expect high enrollment in Russia. So even though it takes about 2-3 months to just be ready with the start of your study in Russia, you will be surprised how fast you will get your patients enrolled at Russian sites. Usually the enrollment rates are like 2 to 5 times higher than in similar trials in Europe or US. So Russia is very famous for fast recruitment. One more important thing, that in Russia you will find good quality, and this is basically because of qualified CRAs that work in the industry. The majority of them are PharmDs and MDs, so they are very qualified and have experience in clinical research. And one more thing, that traditional monitoring with 100% SDV and site visits and talking to doctors, it is still more in practice in Russia. We, of course, doing all the best in accepting and considering all the risk-based monitoring approaches, but we try to be more considerate and balanced in making these quick decisions of canceling visits or reducing the source data verification. We really understand that the quality of the data is very important, and in our case, Russia is ready to provide you with the high quality standards. And this is, by the way, is confirmed by numerous FDA inspections that took part in Russia. I share here some statistics for FDA inspections. You can see that majority of them, almost 70%, had no actions indicated. So the FDA was absolutely happy with what they saw at the clinical sites, and many drugs they obtained drug approval in the United States with Russian data. I took part in several of them, and they're happy, like insulin and health insulin that is currently on the US market, some GI drugs. So this is what we can do. We can help to develop your drugs, to not only, of course, to put them on the Russian market, but also to get FDA approvals and Eurasian and European Union approvals. This is something that you can rely on, especially as we share the same ICH GCP standards, and you can expect the same level or even higher level of quality from the Russian sites. One more thing, that sometimes people are concerned that we do have good knowledge of English, actually. I mean, the investigators who take part in clinical trials, The majority of them, they are, very qualified doctors. They participate in numerous congresses and conferences, and they do speak English. At least it's sufficient to go to, at least to complete the CREFs and to maintain the trial master file in English. But you should know that source document is still in Russian. This is the law. So for monitoring, you will need a local monitor, a local CRA, of course, who is fluent in Russian to verify what is in the source and what is in the CRF. And the last but not the least thing that is very important right now, I suppose, because I understand that even in the pharmaceutical industry, everybody's trying to cut costs, but right now Russia is very attractive in terms of costs. With the Russian ruble, the majority of costs in the studies that we do have, they're in rubles, and you might know that several years ago the conversion rate, it just dropped down significantly. So if you convert rubles to US dollars or to euros, you will see a significant difference comparing to any other countries. In the European region and US, you will find budgets that are like 30, 50, or even 100%. Like they're could be twice smaller than in the West, or even more. So this is something that makes Russia very attractive, and we welcome you to come to conduct the clinical trials. But there is something you need to keep in mind, and it is also important to understand that you cannot know all the specifics. You really need a local expertise. First of all, local diagnostic and treatment standards, they might be a little bit different. They might be maybe a little bit old. Maybe they don't contain all the new, most recent drugs, or they could be just, a bit different from what you expect to see, for example, in Europe. So when you write your protocol, if you consider Russia, you really need to have the consultation from our medical advisors. We also very often we involve key opinion leaders in discussing the protocols, in discussing the criteria, and discussing the treatment that is provided within the trial to make it consistent and to make sure that we do not have any need for any change or amendments. Like once we start the trial, we will help you to make sure that your protocol is consistent not only with general international guidelines but also with the Russian guidelines. Secondly, for medical monitoring and local pharmacovigilance, yes, investigators, they do speak English, but you cannot expect it from your patients. And for medical monitoring, it's quite also important to be in the same time area. You can imagine Russia is a vast country. We have sites in Siberia. We could have sites even further to the east, and there are several hour difference. So when you conduct a clinical trial, it is very convenient to have a local medical liaison, to have a local medical monitor who can talk to your doctors, or to get all this information, to see the all the source supporting SAE reports and so on, and be within the same time zone with the sites. And one more thing, which is more important for those who are already on the market, if you have if you have a drug on the Russian market, you need to have a local QPPV, so the qualified person for pharmacovigilance. Of course, the MOH, the Russian ministry, understands that you, of course, according to European or US standards, you have a global QPPV, but for the Eurasian region, you need to have someone on the ground, someone local, to support all the pharmacovigilance activities within this region. So this is also important to consider, and know that there is a support. For example, we can help you with this, and we provide pharmacovigilance as well. One more thing, that sometimes it is better to trust some legal specifics. Of course, the contract that we have with our clients, they are consistent with whatever legal requirements you have. But when we're talking about the clinical sides, there might be some specifics of clinical side contracting. For example, you will need a bilingual contract, that's for sure. At least, if it's not in Russian, it should be Russian English. So there could be also some specifics that without templates, for example, it takes like a couple of weeks to get the contract signed, sometimes even faster. If you try to use your template, it could take longer because the lawyer from every healthcare institution could have their questions, and you really don't want to delay the start of your study. So trust a local lawyer and work with a local lawyer to make the process faster and to ensure that your country requirements and local Russian requirements, they all met. One more thing, that for Russian trials you need a Russian insurance. This is also part of the Russian law, so you just need to purchase a local insurance, which is very easy. If you're located in Russia, it's absolutely not a problem. So trust your CRO, let them obtain the insurance for you. It is standard. It is governed by the state law, so there would be no issues and no surprises. It is just a standard document that you need to have. So trust your partner on the ground. And one more thing, that as you can imagine, we have a very changing regulatory requirement. We have this Eurasian Union, we have some changes in the drug law. Every year we have some new changes. So it is really important for you to have a local regulatory expertise. Otherwise, you won't catch up. You won't be ready to provide some new document or to change your procedure based on these changes. So you really need someone to support you and to guide you with that. Russia is running fast. We're catching up with Europe. We're catching up with the rest of the world. We are adopting the guidelines from the rest of the world. So the rules are changing all the time, and for bad, not for good, for example, of course, because we're trying to be on the same page. So you really need to have someone local. Well, this is the last tip I want to tell you, that really come to Russia, get your patients from here, get your sites, be happy with the data quality, but be sure to have a local partner with medical, clinical, pharmacovigilance, quality assurance, regulatory and legal expertise on the ground, not somewhere outside of the country. It's really important to understand all the specifics if you are somewhere outside. You need a local partner who will support you and do all the work fast and be your reliable, just be your hand here in the country, and you'll be happy that you made the right decision. Russia, plus if you want Belarus or Kazakhstan, which are parts of Eurasian Union, there's a huge territory, many patients, and we welcome you to come to this area and to conduct the trials. So this is my last slide. This is just the slide with our contact details, and those are my mobile phone and the email address and the contact details of our business development director. So you are very welcome with your questions, with your feasibility requests, with your big read requests. We will help you and guide you in every step that you need to make on the Russian territory, and Russia welcomes you with your clinical trials. Thank you so much and have a great day. Bye-bye.